All right, good evening and welcome everyone to our webinar, Getting Ready for Report Cards, Understanding Ontario's Single Language Mark. Before we get started, I want to start us off with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Dyslexia Canada and IDA Ontario serve individuals on the traditional territories of all of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis across Canada. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to our country. This acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibilities to our relationships and the ancestral lands on which we learn, share, and live. So welcome to our session this evening. We're so happy that you're able to join us. Here's a quick overview of how we've structured our time together this evening. We're going to start off with an overview of some of the basics of evaluation, what has and hasn't changed with the new language curriculum, and some considerations as we determine one mark and the comments to support that on the report card. We're then going to hear from our wonderful ONlit panelists as they share case studies for primary, junior, and intermediate students, how they determined one mark based on the evidence of learning, and the pieces that they made sure to highlight in the comments. We're going to wrap up our time together this evening with questions, and thank you to those of you that submitted questions in advance. We've sprinkled those all throughout the webinar. If any questions pop up that you'd like to share with our presenters, please put them in the Q&A box or in the chat, and we will address them at the end. And we are excited to announce that we do have a prize for tonight's session. So tonight's prize is Next Steps in Literacy Instruction. It's up on the screen. I've got it here. It's my favorite book. This book provides clear and practical answers to how educators can translate the results of universal screening into evidence-based instruction, targeted interventions, and improved reading outcomes. It's a fantastic read, and ONlit is currently offering 2 great book studies in English and in French. So you can join Nellie every second Tuesday or me in French every second Saturday if you prefer to work in French. And we're going to use that to connect assessment to effective instruction. The book is available for free through the OCT library. And if you go into the chat, I believe that Alicia has posted the link so you can sign up for the webinar right away. We are currently just wrapping up chapter 2 and getting into the meat with chapter 3. So you are welcome to join us. You haven't missed out on a whole lot. So stick around until the end of the session tonight to see if you are the winner. Before we dig in, I want to take a moment to introduce the team joining me tonight and thank them for helping to gather all of the great information we're sharing. Laura, Siobhan, and Melissa are members of our curriculum assistance team and have shared some case studies that we're going to look at a little bit later. We also have our ONlit team answering questions in the Q&A and in the chat. And I get to start us off. I am Jordan Sloan, and I'm a bilingual literacy coach with the Renfrew County District School Board. I've had the pleasure of working with ONlit since its launch, and I am the co-host of both the Coaching Network and the host of the French book study for Next Steps in Literacy Instruction every second Saturday morning. As we get into this material, I want to emphasize that we are presenting general suggestions. Your board may have specific policies and requirements, and without a doubt, these take precedence over anything we are going to suggest tonight. Listen to your board before you listen to us. You'll also want to seek guidance from your board with regards to reporting policies for multilingual learners and special education, as well as for their policy around the use of the NA for the early reading screening section of the new report card. I also want to emphasize a few things because we are all coming to this journey from our own starting places. We've all experienced learning at our own pace and in our own way. And as we move through tonight's material, please be mindful that everyone's coming to this with their own understanding and from a place of trying to improve. We're going to consider what we can learn from engaging with viewpoints that do not mirror your own. Engage critically with the content. Do not allow your first thought to be your only thought. Know that growing and learning means that you may shift your position, revisit your assumptions, and advance your thinking, and ensure that conversations are supportive, fostering an environment for growth and learning. So part 1, we're going to get into the basics of evaluation. We're going to start with what has not changed before digging into what's new. We're going to look at comments, evaluation versus assessment, and sources of assessment data. So what has not changed? Point 1 on this slide is a reminder that we teach and assess the specific expectations of the curriculum, but we evaluate a student's achievement of the overall expectations for that grade. This is not changed from the previous language curriculum and is applicable to all of the subject areas of our Ontario curriculums. We certainly continue to differentiate for our students, to meet them where they are, and to work with them to fill gaps and to continue forward momentum. And in some cases, we may be addressing things that are not part of our grade level curriculum to our whole class. When it comes to evaluation and reporting, however, Growing Success reminds us that evaluation accurately summarizes and communicates what students know and can do with respect to the overall curriculum expectations. Remember that these are grade level expectations for the end of the school year and that your professional judgment plays a part in determining how a student is evaluated. The second point on this screen reminds us of just that, the value of our professional judgment as we determine which specific expectations to use when we evaluate achievement of the overall expectations. We use that judgment to determine which expectations we will instruct and assess, but not necessarily evaluate. Remember again, Growing Success states that determining a report card grade involves the interpretation of evidence collected through observations, conversations, and student products combined with your professional judgment. The report card grade represents a student's achievement of the overall curriculum expectations as demonstrated to that point in time. We use content standards, that's curriculum expectations, and performance standards as outlined in the achievement chart to make consistent judgments about the quality of student learning. Another thing that hasn't changed is the use of the achievement chart as a framework for assessing student achievement of the expectations of a particular subject or discipline. It enables teachers to make consistent judgments about the quality of student learning based on clear performance standards and on a body of evidence collected over time. It also provides teachers with a foundation for developing clear and specific feedback for students and parents. The achievement chart for language has been updated to provide examples that align with the new curriculum and includes nonverbal communication. Using the 4 categories of the achievement chart and the overall and specific expectations of the curriculum that relate to those categories, we as teachers can select appropriate assessment methods and strategies, which will allow us to directly assess, evaluate, and track student achievement. All 4 categories must be reflected in the report card grade, and each category must be a significant factor in evaluating student achievement. Using a criterion referenced assessment and evaluation ensures that student work is considered in reference to a standard from across the province. A set of criteria is identified for each category in the achievement chart. The criteria are subsets of the knowledge and skills that define a category. The criteria identify the aspects of student performance that are assessed and are evaluated, and they serve as a guide to what teachers look for. Descriptors indicate the characteristics of student performance with respect to a particular criterion on which assessment or evaluation is focused. Effectiveness is the descriptor used for each of the criteria in the thinking, communication, and application categories. What constitutes effectiveness in any given performance task will vary with the particular criterion being considered. Assessment of effectiveness may therefore focus on a quality such as appropriateness, clarity, accuracy, precision, logic, relevance, significance, fluency, flexibility, depth, or breadth as appropriate for the particular criterion. And that's from our new language curriculum. When assigning, oh, a little too fast there. There we go. When assigning a grade or mark, we need to consider the student's integrated learning across the strands in each reporting period, collected over time. Using multiple sources of evidence increases the reliability and validity of the evaluation of student learning. So here we're considering conversations, observations, and products. Conversations, student-teacher conversations, what students are saying about the learning. So, for example, through questions, connections, extensions, oral or written reflections, student-teacher conferences. We might note the use of new words, explanations for self-corrections, the formulation of questions, or maybe even contributions to whole or small group discussions. Observations in how students are interacting with the learning in small groups, in partner work, in skills, in discussions. We might hear students trying to decode words accurately. We might notice them making connections and corrections in their own reading and spelling. looking for books with more challenging words, perhaps contributing to the vocabulary lists, or even transferring knowledge to new concepts. And finally, products. That is an activity or a task that's a response to the learning. So maybe that's a written work, models, graphic organizers, videos, songs, dramatizations, posters, quizzes. We might see our students creating word webs or decoding new words in various content areas, reading decodable text fluently and accurately, maybe retelling a story or writing a sentence or a simple story. Maybe it's even our students writing letters to friends or relatives, or labeling diagrams, or creating a comic strip or a story map. This qualitative data can be interpreted to determine a report card grade in line with the achievement chart and with your professional judgment. And remember that evidence of student learning should reflect the student's most consistent level of achievement, with special consideration given to more recent evidence. All right, so moving on to what has changed. The 2023 Addendum to Growing Success has shifted to reporting student achievement as one overall grade or mark with supporting comments, with the idea that all strands are connected to and foster a cohesive approach to both instruction and assessment across the curriculum. The ministry emphasizes that we should consider the students' integrated learning across the strands in each reporting period when determining a single mark. We as teachers are accustomed to seeing the strands, literacy connections and applications, the foundations of language, the comprehension, the writing in silos. And we are used to providing that instruction and assessing learning in those areas of literacy without necessarily considering them as a whole. We see the impacts that the strands have upon one another, but we also see our students struggle in some areas more than others. And really, all of us, we want to see growth, and we want to report on the progress that our students are making. And I know for me, it can feel like one mark maybe limits my ability to highlight all of the strengths that I'm seeing with my students. We want the best for, and we want to show the best of our students. As we consider this shift to one mark throughout our session, let's just keep that in mind this evening. We're going to address some of the great questions that were sent in advance, and we're going to take a look at this idea in action with some case studies. So speaking of questions that we received in advance, here is our first submitted question. And thank you to everyone that submitted questions. This question came in several times, and it really does seem linked to this change to one mark. Is it expected that each strand is weighted equally when calculating one mark? So as we consider the weighing of the strands to determine one report card mark, we need to remember to consider the instructional context. This slide illustrates two possible contexts through the pie charts showing different proportions of the strands. In the first chart, you're going to notice that strand B is weighted more heavily than the other strands. What might be the instructional context that has led to this weighting? This might be a primary classroom with significant word level reading and spelling needs. Perhaps the teacher is purposefully giving a big push to teaching grapheme phoneme correspondences and word level reading and spelling, knowing that this initial investment of time is necessary to support strong comprehension in writing for strands C and D. Or maybe this is a junior or intermediate classroom where students have limited awareness of morphology and syntax. So the teacher is strategically focused on building this knowledge of language foundations and conventions in light of the shift in the curriculum. In the second chart, you'll notice that strands C and D are weighed more heavily. Perhaps this is something we might see in a junior or intermediate class with accurate, fluent readers who have a strong knowledge of language foundations and conventions. We might see that the majority of the instruction here is focused on the research-based practice of linking reading and writing. So students write about what they read and they read about what they write. There is no formula set as to how these strands should be weighed in determining a grade for a report card. And this is a place where your professional judgment will help to guide you. Consider the instructional context, consider what you've taught, and consider your students. The case studies a little later will help us to see this in action and to understand the thinking of the teachers as they determined a mark and what they included in a comment. And remember that you have professional judgment here. Use the assessment data that you've gathered, the observations that you've made, the conversations that you've had, and what your students have produced. Use the achievement chart and the curriculum expectations, and remember the instructional context. Growing success tells us that professional judgment is informed by professional knowledge of curriculum expectations, context, evidence of learning, methods of instruction and assessment, and the criteria and standards that indicate success in student learning. The teacher is to use their professional judgment in communicating achievement with parents and students. In professional practice, judgment involves purposeful and systematic thinking that evolves in terms of accuracy and insight with ongoing reflection and self-correction. So we have another question that came in a few times. What should be included in a comment to reflect student learning and align with one single grade? Our comments become increasingly important with the shift to 1 mark. As always, we are going to focus on what students have learned. We're going to describe significant strengths. We're going to identify next steps for improvement. And we should continue to strive to use language that parents will understand and provide them with personalized, clear, precise, and meaningful feedback. Communication about student achievement should be designed to provide detailed information that will encourage students to set goals for learning, help teachers establish plans for teaching, and assist parents in supporting learning at home. Our comments should describe key learning with qualifiers and descriptors, focusing on what they've learned. We can use the information that we've gathered from those observations, conversations, and products to share specific examples of what students have done to demonstrate their strengths. We can then communicate next steps, sharing what the students still need to accomplish, connected to their learning, and be meaningful, clear, and attainable. Our comments reflect that personalized, clear, precise, and meaningful feedback. Although there are formal reporting periods, communication with parents and students about student achievement should be continuous throughout the year by a variety of means. That's like interviews and phone calls and checklists and informal reports and notes. The comments here provide us with a way to communicate what we might have once captured in more marks than 1 and are particularly important as we transition some of the what and the how of how we teach literacy. In a few slides from now, again, we're going to walk through those student profiles and highlight some potential comments or things that we want to make sure that we include in that comment for that child. All right, we're going to take a step away from evaluation and reporting to chat just a little bit about collection of data and the information that's going to help us as we work to determine that report card mark. Assessment and evaluation are different. Assessment is the process of gathering the information that accurately reflects how the student is achieving the curriculum expectations in a subject or course. Educators gather that information about students before, during, and at or near the end of a period of instruction, and we use various assessment strategies and tools. Again, the primary purpose of assessment is to improve student learning. Assessment enables us and our students to know what understandings, knowledge, and skills are to be learned. It helps our students to develop capacity to be independent, autonomous learners and to determine where students are in their learning. And it helps us to guide towards our next steps in achieving those learning goals. Assessment, and this is listed in Growing Success, should be planned concurrently with instruction, be integrated seamlessly into the learning cycle, illuminate what students know and can do, thereby guiding next steps in instruction as the teacher determines how to address strengths and learning opportunities, and helps both teachers and students monitor progress towards achieving learning goals. Evaluation, on the other hand, is that judgment. It's the process of judging the quality of our students' learning of the achievement of the overall expectations. Here we use our professional judgment to determine which specific expectations to teach in order to evaluate achievement of the overall. Evaluation accurately summarizes and communicates to parents and students themselves what students know and can do with respect to the overall curriculum expectations. Evaluation is based on assessment of learning that provides evidence of student achievement at strategic times throughout the year and often at the end of a period of learning. The primary purpose of assessment is to improve student learning. Consider what you use to assess your students. How are you gathering information to determine what evidence-based instruction you are going to provide to align with the needs of your students? This leads nicely into another question that was submitted in advance. of our session tonight, and that is, how do I determine a reading mark without using a leveled-based assessment? This is a really important question, and it's a really common question that we're hearing this year. And I think it stems from the point that many boards are shifting away from using the DRA, the F&Ps, the GB+, the AlphaGen, due to many concerns about how poorly researched these tools are. The Ontario Human Rights Commission summarizes this issue really, really nicely, highlighting that these tools aren't well researched. We can't trust the data that they provide. The idea of reading levels is really unreliable, and it's not instructionally useful, and these tools don't tell us about the important skills that we as educators need to know to effectively teach children to read. We have a really nice handout, and I think Alicia's going to put that link in the chat, called Reconsidering Reading Levels, and it walks through some of these points. And if you're interested, please take a look. There's another issue at play here, and that's that even ignoring these points, should we ever have been using these reading levels for evaluation? Even if these were high quality tools, which they're not, is that a meaningful source of insight that allows us to triangulate data points from conversations, observations, and products to generate a mark for reading? The authors and publishers of these measures emphasize that levels are to be a tool for educators to help us to inform our instruction, are not to be used for evaluation and reporting to parents. Our new language curriculum is skills-focused. It's grounded in the foundational language and literacy skills that we know from research are necessary for children to be skilled, proficient readers, to be able to access all of the benefits that literacy affords. Our evaluation and reporting is also skills-focused. On this slide, we've included a very, very simplified table highlighting some of the skills in the B2 Language Foundations continuum. Remember, there's also a parallel continuum, the B3 Language Conventions continuum, that should also be used to understand student achievement of expectations. Understanding students' accuracy and automaticity with these language foundations, the B2 continuum, and language conventions, the B3 continuum, in combination with B1 overall expectations of oral nonverbal communication, can be triangulated for a mark for strand B. A level-based assessment is not needed, and it's not appropriate. While boards are shifting away from tools like F&P and DRA and PMs and GB+, many are exploring early reading screeners, and this is fantastic. This is an evidence-based practice. And another of the key recommendations of the Ontario Human Rights Commission is to use these evidence-based screening tools. A reminder, though, that these tools, these screeners, should not be used for evaluation. The ministry explicitly states that screening data from tools like Acadian, Stibbles, Easy CBM, and AimsWeb should not be used for the evaluation of curriculum expectations. Again, we highly recommend the ONlit Reconsidering Reading Levels document, and that'll give a clear breakdown on the back of the differences between screening, diagnostic assessment, progress monitoring, and evaluation. Screening measures are really just brief 1-minute indicators of a specific skill, and they're not measures designed to evaluate student achievement of the overall expectations of the curriculum. It is really tempting. I know we all want the checklist. We all want the answers. It's really tempting to use those at, above, below, and well below benchmark labels from those screeners to inform our report card mark. This is not supported by either the Ministry of Education or the screener researchers themselves. The benchmarks are not correlated with grades and are intended as assessment for learning, to drive teacher instruction, and assessment as learning to show progression along the trajectory. Early reading screening is for all of our students is crucial. When screening happens early, schools can identify struggling and at-risk readers to provide early and targeted intervention. Objective assessment of foundational reading skills is essential for all students, but particularly for groups that have historically faced systematic barriers. Assessment that's rooted in culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy, as well as understanding how teacher bias could impact assessment, can support the best outcomes for all students. You can look through all the points on this slide, and you can find this in Growing Success. So another question, and this one was a tricky one for me too. How do we determine a mark for an older student who has not been taught this way or taught the content in previous years? For example, things like morphology and cursive. The Ontario 2023 language curriculum introduces skilled-focused teaching, assessment, evaluation, and reporting, which differs from our past practice, particularly as we consider the foundations of language in Strand B. As we approach these skills in our teaching, we need to remember that we cannot build up without a foundation. This is going to take time and practice for our students and for us as we look to and work for how we're going to assess this learning. In considering how we evaluate these skills for students that were not taught in previous grades, we kind of need to think back to things like when we introduced coding in the math curriculum. We had to go back and teach all of those skills in the same way that we are now doing with things like morphology and cursive. The instructional context matters here in how we balance the evaluation of what we've taught our students, keeping in mind that not everything in the curriculum is completely new. I also like to consider the B3 language conventions continuum. That chart has that continuum of learning where it shows the initial development, the consolidation, and the refinement stretching all the way through the grades. That continuum of learning and that skills development reminds me of learning with students all the way through, that they might be in different places in their development with a concept or a skill. So we've built out this graphic for you as a way of representing how our conversations, observations, and products across strands can converge into one mark. It's important to notice that this determination of one mark is done in the context of instruction and your professional judgment. This helps to clarify, for example, if strands should be weighted differently. We've shown how marks narrow to one single mark, and then comments allow educators to extend and enhance, elaborating on students' strengths, growth, and next steps to give additional details to that one mark. Another important note is the positioning of strand A, with a focus on transferable skills. So that's that digital media literacy and cross-curricular integrated learning. The skills and processes of the overall expectations in strand B are used in the teaching and learning of the concepts in strand B, C, and D, and should be assessed and evaluated within these contexts. All right, we are going to put it into practice. Now that we've laid the groundwork, we're going to dive into some case studies to highlight what this might look like as it's put into practice. We're going to highlight 3 case studies, one for a primary student, one for a junior student, and one for an intermediate student. Note that these students are either students with details changed or they are hypothetical students generated from common patterns. I'm going to pass you over to Laura Bross, who will walk us through the case study for a primary student.
Hello, everybody. I'm Laura Bross, and I'm a grade 2-3 teacher from the Avon-Maitland District School Board. The student I am going to walk us through it today is a grade 2 student. For setting the context, this is a grade 2 student. A report from Speech and Language indicates the child has DLD, a developmental language disorder. He does not currently have an IEP. To help us work toward building a report card mark for this child, I'll walk you through some progress the student has made this year and what strengths and needs I'm currently observing. So in September, this student did not read. He did not initiate reading at all. Phonemically, we see difficulties here, even with basic sound identification and distinguishing between similar sounds. In writing, significant difficulties are observed as well. The student does not initiate writing, and when he does, it is illegible and made of scribbles. We'll show you a writing sample on a later slide. Based on the report from Speech Language, it is not unexpected that the child has significant difficulty with language. He struggles to use appropriate syntax, tense, and vocabulary when speaking. Generally, he is reserved and does not say much in classroom settings, but he is very chatty and communicates with his peers. So now let's look in January. We can see very clear progress from this child. In decodable text, he is fluently reading CVC and CCVC patterns and accurately reading silent E words and words with digraphs. He attempts authentic text now. When spelling, he is using many more grapheme-phoneme correspondences, including consonants, short vowels, beginning blends, and digraphs. He's beginning to use suffixes such as plural s and ing. While the child still has some difficulty with short and short he can now successfully work with 4 and 5 sound words. His writing is now legible, though he is still practicing making the small part of a tall fall letter. He is writing at a better rate. He can now spell CVC and known high-frequency words independently in short sentences. He will now generate ideas and attempt to write a short sentence independently. During oral read-alouds, he can make accurate predictions about what is coming up in the text. He can recall events in order from previous chapters. He has reading comprehension with the decodable text that he can read independently. He can now use new vocabulary when prompted by an adult and give appropriate responses when using a sentence stem. He has tried to use new vocabulary in authentic conversation and has asked me to help him remember the word he was looking for. For example, he asked me, "What's that word again that means busy?" I responded with, "Bustling?" He then finished his sentence with, "Yes, bustling. We were bustling during that assembly," with a great big smile on his face. While we know it is not to be used for evaluation, we've included results from this child's early reading screening to highlight that this child is at risk. In both non-word reading, a measure of decoding, and oral reading fluency, a measure of reading connected text, we see very, very significant levels of risk, as this child is performing significantly well below the threshold for risk. Again, these data don't inform our mark for this child, but it helps us understand that there is a very high degree of risk for this child's future reading proficiency, and gives us an indicator that we need to be targeted and intensive with instruction for this child to ensure he becomes a skilled reader. The data indicates that this student has made great growth in his ability to blend and read words, but still needs intense, explicit, and systematic instruction on word-level reading and reading connected text. There is growth to celebrate, but a lot of intentional work ahead. Finally, here are some writing samples. First, we have his September spelling diagnostic. He has some consistent consonant letter sound knowledge. From my observation notes, he really struggled with letter formation during this task, and as the list progressed, he was exhausted by it. By word 12, I had to help him to get through it as he was getting overwhelmed with the workload. Next, we see this diagnostic again, which was completed yesterday. This was completed unassisted and done in a whole group dictation setting. He happily completed it. Letter formation has greatly improved, and his pencil grip no longer exhausts his hands. He is accurate with consonant sounds and blends, short vowels, and some digraphs. I have not yet explicitly taught long vowel teams in our sequence, so it's expected that he did not include that pattern. Next, we have a writing example that we completed last week. To lead up to this, students worked in groups to reread a text about a famous structure. And then using a template inspired by the writing revolution, they crafted 4 well-written sentences. I was then able to meet with this student and rewrite his 4 sentences on his page so he had a neat model to use. He then took these sentences and combined them into this paragraph about the Eiffel Tower. He was so proud of his work and proudly displayed on our hallway bulletin board. This is a very, very simplified illustration of some of the skill domains in the B2 Language Foundations continuum. It is not exhaustive, but simply a visual representation to highlight the patterns of skills this student is proficient in and specific skill areas for growth. Under phonemic awareness, this student had difficulties blending and segmenting 2 to 3 sounds. Now he can accurately do this skill with 5 sounds. In alphabet knowledge, he could name all the letters, but had a lot of difficulty writing them. Now he can write them legibly, but is still working on size and spacing. In phonics and word level reading, he could not blend a CVC word. Now he can accurately do this and other skills, but is not yet reading multi-syllable words or long vowel teams. This visual allows us to see the growth this student has made this term and movement through the continuum. This student has showed tremendous progress this term. He is now initiating and persevering at reading and writing tasks. He feels good about his growth and wants to practice with the teacher and his peers. He attempts all writing tasks and will use modeled supports. Even though he cannot read authentic text yet or write fully independently, he has shown enough growth that he will do these skills with support. So for example, with decodable text or using sentence stems in writing. I chose a C- because I wanted to honor the tremendous growth and work this student has shown this year, but also show the needed work ahead to get him to grade level. I update parents every few weeks to celebrate success and share next steps, so they are aware of the challenges ahead, but thrilled with the literacy growth in their child. To finish, we'd like to share some next steps for this student. First, he will need continued instruction on isolating and spelling difficult sounds that align with speech difficulties. This includes differentiating between short I and eh, and other minimal pairs such as f and v and ch and j. Next, we will continue our focus on accurate letter formation and word spacing when writing sentences and longer pieces of writing. We will begin instruction on art-controlled vowels and vowel teams in reading and spelling. However, in addition to this, daily instruction and practice will be needed on skills previously taught to ensure mastery. In writing, we will work on writing complex sentences with support such as scribe models for writing in the content areas. And finally, in oral language, we will continue to provide sentence stems to encourage use of new vocabulary. We will support and celebrate the student's attempt at using vocabulary in authentic conversation. Thank you for joining us tonight, and I hope this case study helped you. Up next, we have an example from a junior classroom.
Thanks, Laura. Next up, we're going to see an example from junior and then intermediate with Melissa.
Hello, I am Melissa Manette Smith, and I am currently a kindergarten teacher in York Region District School Board. The first one we're going to look at tonight is a grade 5 student. So this student has strong decoding skills. She's able to read with fluency and accuracy. The teacher is using both oral reading fluency measures and regular conferences with the student to monitor this. Again, like Laura said, these are not used for evaluation, but they are helping to inform the instruction in the classroom. The student demonstrates proficiency in spelling and morphological knowledge when engaging in whole group tasks. Her comprehension is strong and her ability to use a wide range of vocabulary when speaking is proficient. However, she has some difficulty comprehending texts that include complex sentences. When writing, she often uses run-on sentences and fragments and limits her expression to simple sentences. She rarely uses capital letters or punctuation appropriately, or at all, which is having an impact on her composition and communication. Through observations and conversations and products, the teacher has determined her achievement in strand B to be a B-. In strand C, she's receiving a B+, and in strand D, she's receiving a B-. When considering the instructional context of time spent and where growth has been made and continues to lag, the teachers determined that the overall mark for this student would be a B-. Some considerations when writing the comment would include that the student uses knowledge of morphemes to read, understand, and spell unfamiliar words with appropriate accuracy and fluency, that they read and comprehend various texts using knowledge of words, grammar, cohesive ties, sentence structures, and background knowledge. And some next steps would include that the student's going to be supported in integrating various language conventions when writing, including conjunctions, varied adjectives, and adverbs to construct different sentences types and forms. And also that they will be encouraged to imply the knowledge of the function of capitalization and punctuation to communicate meaning when writing texts. Now we're going to switch over to intermediate. We have a grade 7 student here. And it's important to note that a large proportion of the term was dedicated to morphology and vocabulary, as well as reviewing the B3 language conventions, as the teacher's initial assessments showed lagging skills class-wide. This student is a fluent and accurate reader when reading in a variety of settings. The student regularly engages in whole group and individual conversations related to a wide variety of texts, including podcasts, digital and media texts, and from a variety of perspectives. But despite showing competence in B2 and B3, the student requires support in communicating thoughts and ideas in written form. While they regularly engage in conversations demonstrating their knowledge of and ability to respond to text, which would be strand C, developing and organizing ideas from strand D continue to require extensive support from the teacher. The teacher has ample observations and conversations and some products to evaluate growth in strands A, B, and C. The student is not yet demonstrating proficiency in strand B. The teacher has made the evaluations as follows. In strand B, they are getting a B+, which would equate to 78%. They are using the chart in growing success to determine these percentages. In strand C, the student would be receiving an A-, which could equate to an 83%. And in strand D, they are receiving a C, or 65%. Due to the instructional focus of strand B taking up the bulk of the instruction for term 1, the teacher determines a final grade of B+, or 78%. Some considerations when writing comments could include that the student is able to use knowledge of the meanings of words and morphemes to read and spell complex words with accuracy and automaticity, that the student demonstrates an understanding of a wide variety of words and uses explicitly taught vocabulary flexibly in various contexts. The student reads a variety of complex texts fluently with accuracy and appropriate pacing to support comprehension. That the student is beginning to use writing supports such as conferences with the teacher, graphic organizers, and web tools to plan, develop ideas, and organize content for creating text in various forms such as personal narratives and written responses. That the student applies foundational knowledge and skills to understand a variety of texts, including digital and media texts by creators with diverse identities, perspectives, and experience, and demonstrates an understanding of the patterns, features, and elements of style associated with various text forms and genres. A next step for this student could include that the student will continue to be supported with the organization and expression of ideas in the coming term through explicit instruction and support using graphic organizers, support in orally expressing using speech-to-text software, and routine conferences with an educator. And as Laura mentioned in her case study, this of course is not news to the parents. This has been communicated all along that these are the areas that the student continues to struggle with despite having all of these areas of growth.
Thank you to Laura and Melissa for sharing, and to Siobhan, who wasn't able to join us tonight, but shared our junior case study. Before we get into some of the questions that we received this evening, I want to highlight a few of the key takeaways from our time together. First, a reminder to consider the instructional context in the evaluation of student achievement and the determination of a single mark. With the shift to that single mark, comments give us the opportunity to connect growth and key learning and to build partnerships with families. Finally, a reminder to give yourself grace. We are all in this together. You are a skilled professional and you have the judgment and the insight to do this. Okay, time for questions. And the CAT team is going to jump back up on here with me, and Alicia's going to let us know if we have any questions in the chat.
Jordan, I'm just taking away your slide control. I've got it just because I have a bunch of links to click and the back end. I'd just like to jump in by saying we had a really wonderful, lovely, active chat. And Laura, I'm not sure whether you saw any of it because I know it's hard when you're speaking to keep an eye on what's coming in, but there was a whole lot of love for all the wonderful work you're doing with your student, and particularly shouting out, the incredible growth that he's making. So I just want to make sure you saw that, because I too, completely agree. There have been some wonderful questions, and I'd love to point these at some of our wonderful panelists. One that I'll start off with is, how can we support parents and caregivers and families in understanding the new curriculum? I'll just put that out there, and anybody who wants to jump in is more than able to.
Well, I can start us off, and then maybe Melissa and Laura can add in anywhere they want to. Ongoing communication, and both Laura and Melissa mentioned that in their case studies. Talking about parent-friendly language, clarifying terms and jargons. This new curriculum has a lot of terms that might be challenging. So, reaching out to parents using that parent-friendly language. And I think we can add in the chat that there is an ONlit parent glossary that we can share with you. The ministry also has pages for parents that are available, and there is the option to have a parent literacy night. So we've got some slides on ONlit that can also be used to support that. Melissa, Laura, do you want to add anything to that?
One thing I do with my classroom, I send out like a Sunday night week at a glance that I try to have pre-scheduled Friday before I leave school. But and in that, I'll discuss what we're going to learn that week. So I'll kind of clarify some of these terms as we're learning them as we go throughout the year. And then I also include the parent glossary with my report card in the report card envelope when I go home to help. A student like the one I was discussing in the case study, I am sharing kind of progress monitoring updates with those parents every couple weeks to keep them like, this is to celebrate his growth and what my next steps are. And then I find they celebrate with him, and then he comes to school even more geared up, ready to go. So I try to, as we go through the sequence, I share that information with my parents.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I had that parent glossary out for parents when we had our parent-teacher interviews. Just recently, a couple weeks ago, we had a family literacy night at the school to celebrate literacy. And it was really about the joy of reading. We had all of our wonderful staff members there helping out. We had, a snuggle up and read room with a fake fireplace to really just get the love of reading. But we also had a room where parents could come and learn about some of the changes to the new curriculum and how they might support at home.
I'll jump in with the next
Oh,
question.
perfect. Great. Thanks, Alicia. I was about to say, I'll get you another question in just a moment.
There are quite a lot of comments and questions about just the size of the space that you have to write comments on the report card. People are saying, we're limited to 1,100 characters. So, the examples that you all provided were rich and lovely comments. And I think people are wondering, do you actually put those in the report card? Do you shorten them? Do you give them to parents? How much detail are you providing there?
Yeah, unfortunately, you cannot fit all those next steps into that box. I'll be the first to admit that. My past principal was actually at this webinar, and she's the one who always had to cut my comments down. So you just have to pick what is you think the most valuable to put in there. So you have to use your professional judgment, and how can you concisely put in what you think is the most important. And all those next steps that I shared, those are my instructional next steps. So that's still what I'm going to do for that child going forward. But what I fit in that box, that is just what I can do with that space to be the most concise.
Yeah, I completely agree with Laura. It has a lot to do with thinking about the student and thinking about how you're planning on helping move them forward and what you're communicating with parents, and all of the things that Laura maybe doesn't say in the report card, I'm sure she's saying to the parents in other conversations. I did see one comment too about how some of our comments that we made there were very much teacher jargon, and those were just considerations. It's not a word for word what we would put on the report card, and absolutely we are making sure that our language is parent friendly. Like I said, there are those supports of the parent glossary, the caregiver glossary, to help with some of those terms, because we do want to be using the terminology in the new curriculum to be communicating what they are learning and where the growth is, but supporting through those different means and that sort of thing.
And actually, just to jump off that idea, there was one, sorry to put you on the spot, Laura, but there was one more specific question about knowing all that, which I think you've partially addressed, right? Knowing all that, those are your next instructional steps. And then there's a question about, would you be focused more on something that is home focused in terms of what parents or the family could do? Is there any, what judgment would you give in terms of sort of what your most, what makes the cut in terms of what comments make it into that box?
So then I would say it depends on your instructional context and that student. So for this student, we're really focusing on those B foundational skills. I have another student in my class who he's grade 2 and he can read anything you put at him. So, his instructional context is different. His comments might have more stuff to do with syntax in his writing. So again, I think you have to reflect on the student you have and the instructional context and what's the most important next step for that kid.
Do you want to jump in, Alicia? I have another one ready.
Sure. Yeah, there were a couple of people who wanted to clarify or revisit the idea that, obviously we're moving to 1 mark. That's what's happening. But in your examples, you had broken it out and then fed those all together. So maybe you could sort of revisit that logic again, because there were a couple of questions about that in the chat. Or if you're teaching all the strands interwoven together, kind of like, how do you tease that apart to bring it all back together?
I'm teaching in kindergarten this year, but I can sort of think about this from my previous experience as well, is that while I'm creating opportunities for students to participate in all of the areas, so all of the strands, and I am interweaving them, you'll see in that intermediate comment too, that we were talking about all the ways that you could show strand A through those other strands. You are still looking at those individual sets of skills, right? Our new curriculum does have a skill-based component to them that when you look at each of the strands, you can sort of see, like, are they doing these things? So you can look at them both separately as well as together, and it's helping you to gather your assessment for the evaluation, right? So this idea that Jordan was saying too, that in the end, what we are doing is we are creating a judgment, and we are looking at all of these different strands, both together and separate, and how they play off of each other. How you organize your data to make sense to you is a personal thing as a teacher goes. I've been doing this for 17 years, and you find your own systems that work for you. We're just showing you one way that is sort of jumping off of where we left off with the old curriculum, because it might sort of speak to show you that sort of change, that gentle change from one system to another.
I don't want to cut anybody else off if anybody else would like to jump in on that, but I also know that there are lots of questions popping up. Okay. There is a question, and I think to a certain extent, some of this might be linked back to the primary case study, but how do you wrap your mind around a piece where a decoding or sort of a difficulty decoding encoding, and how that relates with other curriculum areas, and sort of how can we riddle that one out when there might be a core difficulty with decoding and spelling, and how do we then evaluate and report on writing, oral language comprehension? If there's any sort of, I know it's a challenging question that I think is one that a lot of people are sitting with, but do you have any thoughts on what that could look like?
That is a challenging question. And I think even before all this learning, that was still a challenging question we all had in our classes, especially in junior intermediate, where you really see the big difference in learners. For me, I try to provide supports to overcome that difficulty with decoding. So in my writing example that I showed, that student went through all the process with his peers to have to, using his oral skills and his background knowledge, to come up with the good 4 sentences orally, because if you can't say it, you can't write it. So we worked like that within groups. And then he still had to go through the process and come up with the keywords and write out a complete sentence with the support of his peers. And then I came in afterwards and helped him rewrite a sentence so it was legible, so then he could do the writing piece at grade level. And then he had something to put up on the bulletin board right beside everybody else that made him feel really proud. So that is a constant give and take as a classroom teacher, how we provide those supports to those students. So they're still getting pushed to practice the skills they need to practice, but while still being able to get at the grade level content. So I know that's not a perfect answer. That's the magic of in teachers, the magic of our instruction, I would say, is part of that.
Can I jump in and follow up? Because there were a couple of questions, I think specifically for you, Laura, about the case study that you presented. People were wondering how much time you're spending working with that student one-on-one, and is he getting support outside the classroom as well? Is he also getting an intervention program outside? Everyone is very impressed with the progress that he's made this term, and I think they're wondering the secrets to your success.
Oh, he does not receive any additional instruction outside of my tier 1 instruction. So I run my structured literacy block, and then I try to do it. It's supposed to be about 13 minutes, but it's a whole class of grade 2, 3. So it usually gets down about 8 or 9. And he's in a small group of 4, where we go back for about 8 or 9 minutes and target those kind of foundational skills we're still working on. But throughout the day, like, I'm always checking in on him. And a bunch of other kids. And sometimes I like to target my whole group, like the skills I know, like say TH, it's a difficult sound for him to make. So when we're doing our kind of code pack, I make sure to throw that one in a couple more times because he needs those extra repetitions. So even though I'm only really getting him 10 minutes small group, there's little things throughout my day that I plan to make sure I kind of target some of those things. How I did it, I've been on this journey for 4 years now. So give yourself grace if you're just starting. It's a journey. It's well worth it, because when you see that little kid smiling and, feeling success, it's worth all the work. But, and just being intentional every day. So everything I try to do every day with these kids is to keep pushing them forward with my instruction. And it's just problem solving and working at it every day.
Well, I'm just keeping an eye on the clock, because as much as I'd love to hang out with all of you and chat all evening long, I do want to make sure, and let me see, okay, did my screen share back? Okay, perfect. I did just want to make sure that I did highlight that Laura and Melissa and Siobhan, who is not with us but did help a whole lot in getting this webinar ready for you, are members of our wonderful curriculum assistance team, and they are available and so keen and thrilled to answer any questions that come in. So if you have questions that are specific to you, or if you had questions that didn't get answered, I know there were some that we missed, and for that I apologize. Please do send us an email. We'll connect you with a wonderful Ontario educator who hopefully can get you the information that you need. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that that's available to them. And I think we are all set for our prize. And I think since I reshared my screen, I think the prize winner it's always, I never know whether the prize winner will show up on the screen, but we are so thrilled. Oh, wonderful. Okay, Jacqueline, congratulations, Jacqueline, congratulations. I always never know whether it will show up on the screen when we announce the winner, but congratulations, Jacqueline. You have won Next Steps in Literacy Instruction. It is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. Deb Glazer and Susan Smart. We are using it for 2 of our book studies this winter, and we really think the world of it for many reasons. It's a really lovely, clear, and concise summary of effective literacy instruction, but it also gives really clear-cut, concrete information on the 3 screeners that have been approved by the Ministry of Education. So for many reasons, we love it, and we are so happy to that we can get that to you. So Jacqueline, if you could send us an email, info@onlit.org, that same email address as the curriculum assistance team, we can get you that book, and we can send it your way. Just on behalf of Jordan and Melissa and Laura and Alicia and MJ and everybody here, we're just so thankful that you joined us this evening, and we are so thankful you came, and we hope we were able to support you. Please reach out with any questions in the meantime. We are so beyond happy to help, and we hope you have a wonderful evening. We'll make sure this session was recorded, so it will we'll send it to you shortly. It will be posted to our YouTube channel, and we'll also make sure we send it out to everybody who registered. So you'll be able to access that, and feel free to pass it along to anybody who you think it might be helpful for. Have a great night, everybody.